Okay, wonderful. Our next speaker is Greg Johnson. Professor Johnson received his PhD in religious studies from the University of Chicago, a very prestigious place to come out of in this field. He is professor in the Department of Religious Studies here at UC Santa Barbara, and my colleague here. And he's also director of the Walter Capps Center for the Study of Ethics, Religion, and Public Life. He serves on the UCSB Campus Repatriation Review Committee and on the Faculty Council for American Indian and Indigenous Studies. Before coming to UCSB, Greg Johnson taught at the University of Colorado, Boulder. Johnson's research focuses on the intersection of law, religion, and indigenous struggles over burial protection, repatriation of sacred objects, and sacred land. His ethnographic work has focused on Hawaiian and Native American contexts, also global indigeneity. And currently he's finishing a book titled Standing in Ceremony, Native Hawaiian Religion, Telescope Protests, and Legal Struggles on Mauna Kea. UCSB is actually party to a multi-university gigantic telescope that has been established top of Mauna Kea on the island of Hawaii. Johnson has engaged in various forms of advocacy and activism in indigenous repatriation and sacred land struggles. And currently he's working to establish tribal co-management initiatives for the University of California natural reserve campuses. So we own some land, our university.
All right, thank you, Mayfair. Thanks to Mayfair, Lisa, Amanda Nichols, the many grad students who've helped put this together. I have to say, and I know you all appreciate this, it's a bit of a crazy vision to have two back-to-back conferences, but it's beautiful, and we're all beneficiaries of that, so thank you all. It's a real honor to be here. I've changed my title up a bit, worrying about censorship. There's less about Ironies of Empire now and more about, I'm calling it now, How to Think with Rainbows. So bear with me. Good, you got the joke. But also, it's a serious change in the sense that as I began to reflect on the plenary topic in front of us today, sacred geographies, multi-species engagement, I thought, let's try something different, and moved out of my comfort zone, so we'll see how this goes. But I can already say, happy news, we're talking about sacred mountains and even birds, so we'll get there. A note on images. I'll be scrolling through images as I go. I want you to have a sense of the places, people, and objects I'll refer to, but the images don't correspond directly with where I am in the text, so don't overthink that. Keep track of your questions. I'd be happy to address those as we go. So as Mayfair mentioned, I will be discussing the 30-meter telescope dispute, a conflict that has relevance for a range of issues at play in the two conferences that overlap in this plenary session. After sketching aspects of the dispute and its religious elements, I will turn our attention to interspecies dynamics on Mauna Kea and what these suggest about living tradition. Relative to the topic of this session, I pose two basic questions to get us started. What registers do we look for? In what registers do we look for religion? And depending on our registers, what do we find? In Hawaii, if one sees like a state, which means looking for things that resemble Christianity, one finds little that could be called traditional religion, a story Kanaka Maoli, or Native Hawaiians, know all too well. If we adjust our optics ethnographically, which is my usual practice, we can see far more. Complex rituals, striking dances, booming chants, all animated by a living language. But in this eye-catching register, we primarily see phenomena that are self-conscious, scripted, and performed. To speak of the performative aspects of religion in this mode is not to challenge their sincerity, but it is to note that in the context of protest movements, critics have framed displays of this sort, such as hula performed in the Mauna Kea access road, as invented, opportunistic, and merely political. In my view, this position is as theoretically bereft as it is politically stultifying. So it is worthwhile, even urgent, to make efforts to diffuse such a flat-footed stance. Taking inspiration from these two conferences, what if the register of our consideration is found in everyday ways of relating to the world, its elements, and its diversity of species? Adjusted thus, we begin to see some of the foundational features of tradition we might otherwise miss. And if we miss them, we also miss an opportunity to make the best possible case for recognition of living traditions in the optics of law. Most of you know this already, and I'm admittedly a latecomer to this way of seeing things, but let me tell you what I've begun to see and why I think it matters. First, I will provide some context for what has been happening in the 30-meter telescope conflict, which for short is TMT, which I have been tracking closely since 2015. In fact, today marks 10 years to the day since I first set foot on Mauna Kea in this context. Little did I know that I was walking into a decade-long protection action that would reshape my scholarly and advocacy trajectories. But when my son and I arrived in the camp and the first person we met asked us if we had our bail money ready, I knew we were in for an interesting time. On that day and during the intense years that would follow, I met a number of grassroots folks with whom I still work and now am honored to count as friends. Part of my motivation for thinking about ground-level expressions of Hawaiian religion is to put into words my estimation of their incredible cultural expertise, which is often overlooked because it is so subtle and understated. By this I mean to flag their basic modes of comportment, their handyman-like competence with the things of the material world, their sumptuous foodways and untroubled aesthetics, as well as their collective command of deep histories and complex genealogies. In my view, they are as much the bearers of Hawaiian tradition as our various academic experts and the many revered ritual leaders and hula teachers across the islands. And they know how to read signs, which I will return to shortly. So a little background on Mauna Kea and TMT. Let's begin with why many Native Hawaiians or Kanaka Maoli regard it as sacred. 2,000 years ago or so, when Polynesians first arrived in Hawaii, the most remote island chain in the world, they most likely arrived at Hawaii Island, the Big Island, seeing Mauna Kea for the first time. It rises to 14,000 feet and is snow-capped much of the year. In their cultural experience, they had not experienced ice and snow. This demanded that stories be told about it, and indeed it entered the oral tradition right away as a powerful place. It became understood in the oral tradition as a site of genealogical creation, of landforms directly relating to animals and then to humans. It is the apical ancestor in many ways. And then through the tradition, it becomes a site of pilgrimage, a site of various ritual practices and burials and so forth, an unbroken chain up to the present. Full stop, it is a sacred mountain in the most robust sense and has been. Now, fast forwarding to the 20th century, late 1960s, Mauna Kea becomes coveted as a site for astronomical observation. It has remarkably clear and stable skies, and it benefits from the infrastructure of the military and so forth. So from the 1960s to the early 2000s, 13 different telescopes were built on Mauna Kea. In 2010, the 30-meter telescope project was proposed and immediately ran into resistance by Kanaka Maoli, Native Hawaiians. It is much larger than any other proposed telescope, and also the Hawaiian Renaissance movement of the uplifting of their culture had at that point really come to strong fruition, and people were ready to take up the challenge. Multiple legal cases, administrative hearings, punctuated the setting, and then 2 direct action protests, one in 2015 and one in 2019, both of which I attended, documented, and participated in. These were the site of much religious action, and I'm about to get to that. But let me note for a moment what Mayfair said about this university's implication in the project. It has not yet been built, and To my mind, I hope it doesn't get built for a variety of reasons, but it's still very much in process. The National Science Foundation has recently pulled funding from it for the reason that it's basically collapsing, the NSF that is. But the 30-meter telescope corporation has lots of resources and deep pockets, multinational and so forth. The University of California system is the primary driver of the project, okay? And the chancellor of this campus, Henry Yang, is the chair of the board of directors of the project. So this is a very acute local issue to my mind. And as a director of an ethics center here on campus, our mantra has become at the center, ethics starts at home, institutions included. If we're going to do things like land acknowledgements and welcome Native students to our campus, well, we should look after our own house and make sure when we go outwards and engage Native peoples on their land that we're engaging in legitimate consultation practices and seeking their consent, which has not happened. Okay, to the direct action protests and the religion that is unfolding in those contexts. Up until the mid-20th century, Native Hawaiians practiced a strong ethic of avoidance on Mauna Kea. That is, for the most part, outside of ritual, they would not go there. It was a sacred place, and it needed time unto itself. However, with desecration by way of telescope building, that has shifted to an ethic that demands presence, an ethics of care, an ethics of attending to the mountain to help protect it. So there's that shift. They have done so by what they call kapu aloha, the rule of peace or love. This is a non-violent direct action protest mode learned from Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., among others, but also from sources in their own tradition. It's about standing one's ground in peace and love without provoking the police or the state. A trick we can appreciate is hard to achieve. The forms of religious life that have unfolded in these protection actions are embodied, like hula dancing, chanting, singing, in the road to block traffic, but in ceremony. So we're talking about political, religious things happening simultaneously. They're profoundly material. Ahus, such as the structure you see here, this is a worship pillar built on the 30-meter telescope proposed site. Other objects have been, traditional objects have been built and revered in these contexts, and so forth. It is multi-generational, little children, grandparents, and so forth. It is innovative. People are absolutely adhering to their tradition, but playing with it as they go, moving it forward to face new circumstances. It's language-centric, it's public, it's collaborative, it's post-Christian. By that, I don't mean to suggest Hawaiians aren't Christian, many of them are, but for the sake of this movement and in this space, they choose to de-emphasize that and uplift their common Hawaiian identities. Nonetheless, despite all of this manifest religious action and presence, they have not been afforded constitutional protections for their actions or for the land they seek to engage. So that's the nature of the problem I want to puzzle with here as we move forward. So to the theme of the panel here, how religious cultures shape multi-species interactions on Mauna Kea. I think if we can attend to this, we can move the needle just a bit. I want to begin by posing the issue as a problem. And the problem is this, namely, in the view of the state and frequently in the media, the protectors, the activists, are frequently described as disaffected thugs looking for a fight. Their religious practices are seldom taken seriously and are usually dismissed as theater and as a distraction. Now, if we're to resist this summary verdict, we can look to how these thugs engage their environment and the things of nature in the protest camps. For example, consider what happened in September of 2019 when an iau, a hawk, circled the protest camp at Pu'uhuluhulu. People shouted, "Ho'ailona." I was there, it just reverberated, people, "Oh, Ho'ailona," a sign. The bustle of the camp slowed down. People began to talk among themselves. What did it mean? Let me tell you just a little about Ho'ailona, this practice of reading signs. Ho'ailona means both the sign itself and the act of interpreting a sign. It's an everyday modality of lived religion, a baseline aspect of expressive culture in Hawaii that has persisted across the ebbs and flows of colonial history. It is about paying heightened attention to specific elements of nature and asking, what do they mean? In short, ho'ailona interpretation is a form of collective, open-ended divination, which is why I'm framing it as a religious activity, pointing as it does to more than human relationships, knowledge, and forms of authority. Now let me tell you very briefly how I first learned about ho'ailona. My first teacher in Hawaii, a revered gentleman named Kekuni Blaisdell, took me on, and at that point I knew very little, so we were working on vocabulary, categories, and so forth. We were driving to a meeting, and he says, oh, pull over, a rainbow. I'm like, okay, cool. But rainbows are really common in Hawaii. It's such a beautiful place. I thought, well, that's kind of weird, but okay, cool. And he says, ho'ailona. I said, oh, that's the word for rainbow. He said, no. Sign. It's the word for a sign. I'm like, oh, well, what does a rainbow mean? And so I said, not what do rainbows mean? What does this rainbow mean for us now? Don't you see? And I'm like, oh, okay. And then he puzzled. He thought it could be an auspicious sign. And he says, well, it also means we were kind of early and we needed to pull over and rest for a bit. So, in any case, this is not esoteric knowledge. It's situational, it's contextual, it's applied in the moment. It relies on what Hawaiians call makavalu, which means 8 eyes, that is, multiple perspectives, rendered by the community to say, how do we understand this? What is happening now? And functionally, it slows things down so people can simply take in the moment. Okay, so back to Mauna Kea. Here in 2015, during the protests, there was a ho'ailona. Police were marching up the mountain, arresting the protesters as they performed hula dances in the road. At that moment, I was right there, a heavy fog rolled in fast, and people shouted again, ho'ailona. And they began to say, why has fog, which is a deity, a water deity in Hawaii named Lilinoi, why has Lilinoi come? And they began to deliberate. Oh, she's come to comfort us. She's come to cool us. She's come to cover us, hide us. And mostly she's come to say, nature has your back. So that was one modest ho'ailona. So back to the hawk in 2019. Now a hawk, of course, is an animal. And Hawaiian ways of thinking in genealogical terms, humans are directly related to animals, okay? And these sets of relationships demand reciprocity, relationship, and presuppose communication, that we can communicate at some level. And there's a specific modality of this relationship where some animals are understood to be aumakua. Aumakua means an ancestor embodiment. And so when there's an auspicious sign, a ho'ailona, that's frequently understood to be an aumakua on the horizon who's saying, pay attention, okay? So in the camps that day, again, when the hawk is circling, people convened and they began to talk, makavalu. Is it a warning? Is it here for our protection? Maybe it's to show us a strategy of seeing from above like a hawk. It's about vision. And again, the overarching message, a thing of nature, is here, not over with the police, but here with us. And also, stop, reflect, take it in. Let's remember why we're here. So this kind of thing, it's humble, it's subtle, it's organic, it's unforced, it escapes the media. The media doesn't write about such things, right? But I think it's really important as we try to take hold of different religious traditions to think of these very humble, that's the best word, I think, religious expressions. With this example and many more that could be added, I hope to have persuaded you to think differently about the thugs in the camps. They weren't thugs at all, I submit, but philosophers, diplomats, and students of nature, which in their tradition happens to engage and guide them. Conclusion. I have focused on ho'ailona practices because they afford one response to the claim that Hawaiian religion is either dead or merely political. Without waxing too essentialistic about the matter, I am persuaded that such practices and the modes of attention they engender bespeak a deeply sentimented and vibrant tradition, Nothing is more Hawaiian, it seems to me, than pausing to think with and about a rainbow or a hawk. Cultural comportment of the sort that yields a reverence for and attention to the things of nature in this way is something that deserves sustained attention, especially if we wish to understand how indigenous ways of being in the world can persist even when the more visible elements of tradition, language, land, ceremony, have been subjugated, erased, and stolen. Said plainly, I'm trying to make the case that an everyday Hawaiian who pauses to ponder a ho'ailona is no less religiously Hawaiian than a revered kahuna chanting for the ancestors. Both acts rely on similar assumptions about the nature of the world and how to communicate with it. If our register for perceiving religion counted only the kahuna, we'd have a serious problem explaining how the events on Mauna Kea, for example, have catalyzed a massive movement among grassroots folks who have little formal training in their traditions, but command considerable tacit knowledge, effective, somatic, and practical, about how to be Hawaiian. This line of analysis is not novel, of course, and I'm leaning on a range of thinkers in religious studies, indigenous studies, Hawaiian studies, and old-fashioned anthropology to formulate my ideas. But rather than stage a citational parade here, let me say again that my primary teachers have been the folks I've been collaborating with on the ground. When they pause to point out how the flight of a bird overhead portends a coming storm or augurs an auspicious day, I've learned to pay attention. If we scholars of religion can attend adequately to such humble modalities of cultural life, and I am confident that similar dynamics obtain in many indigenous cultures, then we can nuance our analytical understandings of religion to add accountability to phenomena such as ho'ailona and other less than obvious modes of expressing religion. Additionally, in doing so, we will have more tools available if and when we seek to advocate for indigenous communities as they face discrimination and violence. The task is to persuade unsympathetic audiences in the courts, in the academy, and on the streets that such humble and quotidian gestures as ho'ailona interpretation may undergird and animate religious life in ways that demonstrate a strong thread of continuity and perdurance across time, including across colonial ruptures. Such an agenda is at once theoretically challenging and politically urgent if we are to get beyond categorical limitations that forever hem in what counts as indigenous religion. Thank you.